Hey there, Penn State fans, Bob Flounders, Johnny McGonigal, a lovely Tuesday in Pennsylvania. We are going to react to James Franklin's Tuesday Newser here on the Blue White Breakdown. And James was in one of those moods where he didn't give up a lot of details today after Penn State got smoked by Michigan over the weekend in Ann Arbor. But he did answer a question about the quarterback position at Penn State and kind of what he would say to people who are clamoring, maybe not clamoring, Johnny, but kind of want to see the new guy. They want to see the youngster who played, Drew Allar, played the last 11 minutes of the game. A lot of it wasn't really mop-up time, and then James said after the game that Sean was actually left the game with an undisclosed injury. But, when you lose by 24, and I think most Penn State fans, the last 10 quarters of Sean Clifford's time at Penn State have not gone great. I think they are really hoping maybe to see Drew, quite a bit of Drew against Minnesota during the whiteout Saturday night. But, Johnny, it looks like if Sean Clifford is healthy, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, Bob. Credit to Corey Geiger, by the way, of DK Pittsburgh Sports for asking the question on the Zoom during James's Tuesday press conference. I was next in line. I had the same exact question, lined up. And I'm sure that's happened to you in the past. At least they give you a heads up. Hey, you're next.
Yeah.
I think on my feet and ask something else. But yeah, the question was, hey, what do you say to fans and whoever else who follows the program who think that Drew Allar should be the guy, that he should be supplanting Sean Clifford right now as a starting quarterback. And yeah, I thought James's answer was pretty interesting. First of all, he said, that's the wrong message and it's the wrong signal, and that Sean has earned the right to be on the field, and that they would love to get Drew some added work. He's already played in 5 games, Bob, so he's not redshirting this year. That 5th game was against Michigan when he came in the fourth quarter during that time in which Sean Clifford was getting his looked like maybe his shoulder checked out in the medical tent. At least that's what the Fox broadcast insinuated. James continued, though, and this was the more interesting part of the quote to me, at least. He was talking about in 2016 when Penn State lost to Michigan, then played Minnesota the following week and won and found a rhythm, and ended up going on and winning the Big Ten title. It was a text from Mike Gesicki during Sunday Film Room that reminded him of that. And James said, "Look, you do whatever you can possibly to win, the next week." And he said, and I think some of those approaches in regards to playing Allar aren't necessarily about winning this week. In terms of that mindset of, hey, like, season's over, let's just let's move on. Let's move on from Clifford, and we're not making the playoff, whatever, and let's just play Allar just to basically get into 2023 and 24 and look ahead. So I don't know what you think about that approach, Bob, but that's kind of how James Franklin laid it out.
Yeah, I mean, if what Mike, the text between Mike and James, I mean, he wasn't wrong about the 2016 season. What I would say, though, is I think it was Minnesota, and it was a home game, and Penn State was behind until the very end. I think they needed a field goal to force overtime, and then Saquon Barkley had an incredible run in overtime to win. And I think Minnesota had scored first, and then Barkley scored, and that ended the game. But I'll say a couple of things about that. If they had lost that game to Minnesota, that there was some unhappiness in Beaver Stadium that day until they pulled it out. And Trace McSorley was the quarterback of that team. That was his first year as starter, and he was just getting started. Sean Clifford is not just getting started at Beaver Stadium, right? He's been the starter since 2019. This is 2022. And the last 10 quarters of this season have started to look a little bit like the 2021 season with Sean Clifford down the stretch. Penn State also had Saquon Barkley, Mike Gesicki, and Chris Godwin on that 2016 offense. They needed every bit of all those guys to win that game. Is it a similar situation? I guess maybe you could argue that it is, but I could see some differences this time around. I would also say, Johnny, if Sean Clifford starts off slowly or he makes some mistakes on the whiteout, I don't think the fan base is going to be very happy, and they're going to let James and they're going to let Sean know it.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at the last time Penn State was at Beaver Stadium, there was a smattering of boos, not like everyone in the stands by any means, but that Northwestern game, the rainy, nasty game that it was, there were some boos for Sean Clifford because he didn't play well. He was missing wide receivers. And so this is going to be the first time back in front of fans after, in Beaver Stadium after a bye week, after a disappointing result at Michigan, assuming Sean Clifford can play. James Franklin is always going to be coy and secretive about his injury information. And so we'll see if Clifford is able to go. And if he is, he's probably going to be the starter. And look, I get James Franklin's thinking, but I kind of lean with you, Bob, right? This is not a 2016 Trace McSorley situation or anything like that. This is a guy who has had enough time and in James Franklin's eyes has earned the opportunity. In a lot of fans' eyes has, overstayed maybe that opportunity or that welcome in terms of what he has been able to do and what he hasn't been able to do. And yeah, you're gonna have a lot of fans that are riled up in a whiteout atmosphere that a lot of them have been tailgating all day. The beers will be flowing at Beaver Stadium as well. So look, if things don't start off right, you're gonna get quite a reaction from the crowd in Happy Valley. And one thing I will note too, in that 2016 game against Minnesota, it was that Saquon touchdown that won it, but it was a fourth down run, a scramble by Trace McSorley that extended that game and really set that whole thing up. Can Sean Clifford do something like that for you? Are you that confident that he is that good of a playmaker? And he showed you the 62-yard run at Michigan. That was a nice spark. But I think they need to get more out of him. They need to get more out of this offense overall. The running game wasn't there against Michigan. The passing game was kind of all over the place. And so they need to tighten things up, and they need to win this game because Ohio State is coming in next. Yeah,
and John, we mentioned the fans, and we mentioned, hey, a slow start on offense, and James will hear about it, and Sean will hear about it. Mike Yurcich is also going to hear about it because, I mean, it is his offense. And he was when he was hired, James was very emphatic. And guess who's in town? Kirk Sherrock is in town, right? The guy that James pulled the cord after one season, 9 games, the COVID season, where they didn't even get to coach. The coaches didn't really get to coach on the field until the season started, basically. He pulled the cord on Kirk, who's now back as the Minnesota OC. And so it's Mike Yurcich's show. When James hired him, he said, look, we're bringing this guy in. We want more points. We want more big plays. We want fewer turnovers. I think the jury is just as much out on Mike Yurcich as it is really at this stage on Sean Clifford. And you're right. It is a whiteout atmosphere. And if Penn State really struggles or if Penn State loses, it's going to be a tough weekend, I think, for Penn State's coaching staff if they would lose this game. Sean definitely needs to play well. If they lose and he plays well, I think then it's another issue. But Penn State's licking its wounds after getting just physically drubbed by Michigan, and now they're going to face a Minnesota team that Minnesota's got some issues on offense too. They might not have Tanner Morgan, their 6th-year quarterback, but one thing I know about Minnesota is they can run the ball. And if they could keep the ball for 35 minutes in this game, the pressure really could be on Penn State's offense.
Yeah, Bob, that's actually what I wrote about upcoming. If you're listening to this on Tuesday, just wait for Wednesday morning. It'll come out, but a little plug there. But yeah, I wrote about Minnesota's running game and kind of what they've been able to do so far this season. Mo Ibrahim, the main tailback, 4th in the country in yards per game. Missed the game in there and had to deal with an injury, but he's back. If Tanner Morgan's back, then that gives you a veteran quarterback who can play off that play action, push the ball downfield in Soraka's offense, and really stretch Penn State's defense and kind of put them in conflict. And I think Minnesota's offensive line is really good. John Michael Schmitz, the most Minnesota offensive line name of all time. Of all time, Bob, is their starting center. He's a midseason All-American. He's been incredible this season. Their guards have been great, one of which is a Michigan transfer. They've just been opening up holes for Ibrahim and done a really good job. Now, you have to balance it, too, with who Minnesota has faced.
Yeah.
New Mexico State, Colorado, who's really bad. Michigan State isn't good this year. Western Illinois in the FCS. And so, their 4-2 start, some could say is a little fluky or soft or whatever adjective you want to use there. So you have to balance that against what they've gone up against. But we saw Michigan, again, their running game go up against, lackluster opponents. And that was the question going into last week's game.
Yeah.
So, Michigan hasn't faced a defense like Penn State yet. And then we saw what happened: 418 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns. I almost said Jonathan Taylor. Donovan Edwards. I'm thinking about fantasy. I've been making trades all day, Bob. It's mid-season in fantasy. I've been wheeling and dealing. But Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum running all over Penn State's defense. They can't allow that to happen again, especially in a whiteout atmosphere. You would hope that maybe they'll be able to galvanize the defense a bit, and Abdul Carter and Curtis Jacobs and PJ Mustipher, these guys who felt embarrassed with the performance at the Big House, will show up and correct those wrongs.
So 2016 is kind of the rallying cry, I think, this week for James Franklin.
Yeah.
They got blown out that year at Michigan, and they did get up off the deck to beat this Minnesota team. But they beat Minnesota. Minnesota was leading like the whole game almost. They caught him in overtime, and that and the upset of Ohio State really was the springboard. And they got better and better as the year went on. And maybe that, if a win against Minnesota and then a competitive effort, or even an upset of Ohio State. Let's not just say a competitive effort, an upset of Ohio State. And this season's going to look a lot different. But right now, I think the fan base, a lot of people, a lot of national experts have that image of what Michigan did to Penn State. It's hard to get out of your mind. And we were there, and honestly, I didn't even think the game was that close. It wasn't 41-17 close. Penn State got a fluky interception return for a touchdown, and you mentioned Sean Clifford. Kind of Michigan just, they almost had him in the backfield, and the next thing you know, he's running 62 yards to set up a short touchdown run on 4th down. They don't get that. But it wasn't even that close of a game. It was really actually probably even more lopsided. And that's I don't know, Johnny. I'll tell you what I was surprised about, and maybe I can get your thoughts on this. I thought, given that Tanner Morgan was questionable for this game and Minnesota, losing to Purdue and losing badly at Illinois, I think they had less than 200 yards of offense. I thought Penn State would still be maybe favored by double digits or close to it in this game. They open at 5.5, and it immediately goes down to 4.5, which tells you people are betting early in the week on Minnesota. That surprised me, but I just wonder, that line and the fact that it moved in Minnesota's direction tells me that a lot of people, maybe it's not just the Michigan game, it's the second half of the Central Michigan game and what happened against Northwestern. Then maybe this is, people are trying to read the tea leaves. Maybe it's not just about what they did against Michigan. It's really been about the last 2.5 games.
Yeah, and look, this is a Penn State offense that doesn't really have an identity right now. James Franklin was asked about that during his press conference today, and he said, "Yeah, you've seen what we try to do. We try to run the ball and work play action, and the running game was good against Auburn. Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, a couple touchdowns each." Yeah. They didn't go going at all against Michigan. It really didn't have an opportunity. Both of them combining for 12 carries, 35 yards. I felt like they gave up on the running game a little early, and they haven't really done much in the intermediate to short passing game either, all that effectively. They haven't gotten the ball to Parker Washington enough. He still doesn't have a touchdown through 6 games, which is crazy to me. Brenton Strange with only 1 catch at Michigan, only 1 target. That's a guy who helped you win the Purdue game that has been such a factor, especially in the red zone, but such a security blanket for Sean Clifford. And he's been barely involved the last 2 games. I just feel like they need to do more. They need to push the ball down the field a little bit more. They need to protect better. I think Allar has done a really nice job on the left side. That right tackle spot is an area of concern continually for this Penn State team. And so you don't really have an identity on offense. And then defensively, you're thinking, okay, the identity is that this secondary is so good, and you're able to create disruption in the secondary and pick balls off and bat balls away and all that. Well, when you're just getting bludgeoned by the running game time after time after time after time, it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, Penn State had one pass breakup against Michigan, and it was the Chop Robinson tip drill at the line of scrimmage that forced the pick six. So when you're getting run all over like that, the secondary doesn't really do much for you. So if Tanner Morgan, even if he's out, and if Minnesota is still able to run the ball, I mean, it kind of neutralizes Penn State's best weapon, its best strength, and so. You got to be able to stop the run. You got to be able to do it. And that's going to be, again, on display this week when Mo Ibrahim gets the ball 25, 30 times.
Yeah, I mean, it was wild. The Michigan game, Kalen King didn't even play in the first quarter because, Penn State basically went with two corners, and the rest were even if they went to a 5 DB set, the fifth defender was a safety. They went with three safeties instead of three. We just didn't see a lot of they were so focused on in run support that I don't think Kalen played until the first series, I think, of the second quarter. But Minnesota is going to do the same thing. How can they not just try and do what Michigan did? And Franklin referenced that. He expects that. But, last year, Johnny, after Penn State lost their first game to Iowa, I believe they had a bye week, and then Illinois came in. And they were, I think, 24-point underdogs or something, very close to it. And Brett Bielema, who is the leader in the clubhouse to be the Big Ten Coach of the Year, he's got them off to a flying start. They look really good.
Big Ten Coach of the Year. You're talking about National Coach of the
Year. Yeah. Johnny, they were at some point in the second half, Brett looked at what they were doing at scrimmage to Penn State's. P.J. Mustipher was out. His season was over. They would have a quarterback. They would have a running back. Everyone else was either a tight end or an offensive lineman. They just had everyone at scrimmage. Penn State couldn't stop it. I don't even know if they tried to throw the ball more than 10 times. I mean, I think PJ Fleck and Kirk Shiraka are going to concoct something like that. They have the offensive linemen and the running backs to do that. And Penn State has to be careful that Minnesota isn't able to just try and play keep away with that big running back. They got another runner, Trey Potts, behind him, who's if Mo needs a blow, he's pretty good too. He's averaged just about 5 yards a carry. This is a scary game, I think, for Penn State because is there going to be a hangover? They've had issues with that in the past. Ohio State's the next week, so this is not a bad Minnesota team. They're struggling, but man, if they can circle the wagons and Kirk Shiraka can get a little payback for the one year coaching job he had at Penn State, boy, it could get really messy, Johnny. And I think you're right. I think PJ and Kirk are smart enough to say, look, even if Tanner Morgan plays, we just haven't really had a lot of success throwing the ball of late since the Michigan State game. Why don't we just try and run it? Why don't we just try and play keep away? And maybe that is the strategy that can really give Penn State trouble.
It's going to be a put up or shut up kind of situation for Penn State's defense this game and their front seven specifically. We look back at what this team has done off of close losses and heartbreaking losses in the past, going back to 2017 after the blown fourth quarter lead at Ohio State. They go and lose to Michigan State. 2018 4th and 5 against Ohio State. After that, you go and lose to a 7-6 Michigan State team. 2020 as well. You lose to Indiana in the opener and it snowballs. So last year, Iowa, and then the Illinois game, like you mentioned. So this has been a theme in the past. So it's a theme that they have to break. And really, against the run, they just have to tighten up. I mean, and I think the defense has kind of taken that responsibility on, at least from what we talked to Nick Tarburton this morning on one of the player conference calls, and he was telling us that during Sunday's film review of the Michigan game, the entire defense sat together and watched that film together as opposed to breaking off into individual position rooms, and they saw collectively how many plays they left out on the field and felt responsible for. And so they feel like that they're still built to stop the run, that they're still good enough, and they have the talent and they have the size, and they're going to have to show it. They're going to have to show it. It's not just, it's not just PJ Mustipher, in the middle. He took a lot of the brunt after the game as a senior and a captain, you would expect. But this is a front seven, from starters to backups to even third stringers that have had to rotate in. This is a systemic thing, and it's on Manny Diaz and this defense to get it fixed. And so we'll see if they're able to do that. And if they are, and if they're able to get a lead, and then force Minnesota to come out of that. I think that's your path to victory, as it was against Michigan. I don't think this Minnesota running game is as good as Michigan's running game, so you have that going for you at least. And again, you'll have that whiteout crowd at your back, hopefully supporting you, not yelling at you and screaming at you and getting mad. So we'll see. I understand why it's not a 10-point spread or anything, because Minnesota's good, and the thing that they do is what Penn State just struggled with last week.
Yeah, and here's the other issue that Michigan kind of really exposed. There's no doubting that Penn State's defense is deep and it's athletic, but it's light. In the front set, you look at the front seven, other than P.J. Mustipher, Curtis Jacobs is a fantastic talent. He is not a big linebacker. Jonathan Sutherland is a converted safety. He's not a big linebacker. They have some inexperience still in the middle with Elston and Kobe King. James pretty much made it known that he's not happy about the size maybe of his defensive line. The Aaron Donald reference. And then he kind of doubled down on it again today when he said, yeah, it's a weapon. Size is a weapon. If it's good weight on the players, it is a weapon. And then there's a couple guys I'd like to see a couple pounds heavier. I think more than a couple of pounds. Now, he didn't mention any names, but we could just go through it right now. Hakeem Beamon is not the biggest defensive tackle. Adisa Isaac is not a really big defensive end. Chop Robinson is a disruptive player, but he's at about 245, maybe 250 pounds. And they were severely, I think, out-muscled at scrimmage. I think, James referenced it. And this Michigan offensive line, the center's 320. They have a tight end that's like 6'8", 270. He's going to be hurt. From all those guys are big boys. So the question becomes, how, if you're Manny Diaz, do you counteract the running game? And once that gets going, and if they go with extra offensive linemen and extra tight ends, how are you going to stop that? If Penn State can't get a lead on this bunch and Michigan's hanging around, you could make a case, Johnny, that this offensive line of Minnesota is capable of really wearing on Penn State's defense. When they got the big lead on Auburn, when Auburn turned it over and they started to get separation in the third quarter, Auburn really didn't try and run the ball. Tank Bigsby's a good back. He went off on Saturday against an SEC team that's pretty good. But it was not that kind of game when Penn State played them, and they kind of got away from it. But I don't think Minnesota's going to do that. I think Minnesota's going to say, look, this is what we do best on offense at this point in the season, and we're just going to commit to it. And if Penn State can stop it, good for them. But if they can't, it's going to be a 4-quarter game.
It's one of those. I got a question this week in my mailbag, Bob, and it was along those lines about the defensive line, about the size, and about what they have at their disposal right now. And the question was along the lines of like, hey, these guys can't get 30 pounds heavier in a week. Like, what do they do? It's like, well, you try and scheme them up better. You try to practice your tackling angles. There's not a whole lot you can do by way of Hakeem Beamon's size right now and Adisa Isaac's size. That's stuff you have to take care of in the offseason. That's something you have to take care of long-term on the recruiting trail, is getting bigger guys and go through it like that and developing guys like that. Because James Franklin was saying after the Michigan game in his post-game press conference about that, saying, hey, we have to recruit better and develop better and all that. It's if you're a Penn State football fan and you're listening to that and you just lost by 24, I mean, there's so many people that, and James knows this, everyone in Penn State's program, the players, everyone knows this. There's so many people invested in this program who have been fans, whether they went to school at Penn State, they grew up watching Penn State. There's so many people invested in how they do every Saturday. And to hear that from the coach who's been coaching, has been in charge for 9 seasons, it's just a tough look, because you're saying, hey, we have to do this, we have to do this, we have to do this. Well, you've had to do that for 9 years. Like Michigan, it's the Big Ten we're talking about. You know what I mean? Like, this is something that should have been, or should have been corrected, or should have been well in place by now. And so I understand the fans' frustration over a loss like that. If you go out and you lose to Michigan, you're 7-point underdogs. If you lose by 10 or something and it's close and it's respectable, okay, you move on with your Saturday, you move on with your weekend. You go ahead and watch the Phillies and the Birds on Sunday, or the Phillies on Saturday, and then. But it's just not that, and so I don't know. I think it's really tough right now to see the light at the end of the tunnel, big picture. When you talk about the Michigans and the Ohio States, you have to focus on Minnesota this week, and you have to beat Minnesota. But I don't know. I just thought it was a really rough result and kind of a rough message after the game. I don't know if you agree.
Very rough message, tough to take. I don't think a lot of fans have handled this well. I mean, I don't blame them. I think they deserve. I think they should be upset to hear that. It's a frank assessment, but you can't walk that back. Once you say that, you can't walk it back, and it is true. But how did it get to this point? You're not in year 3 of your program. You brought your veteran strength and conditioning coach with you from Vanderbilt. This is Chuck Losey's first year. So, I mean, it's really, really hard to take. And I think, Johnny, one of the ways you can take some of the pressure off your defense is your offense can score consistently in the 30s. And they can't do that now, right? You look at since the second half of the Auburn game, they barely got to 30 at home against Central Michigan. They turned the ball over. They scored 17 against Northwestern. They only scored 10 points on offense against Michigan. One of those touchdowns was a defensive touchdown. So I just think all the way around Saturday was a very tough day to hear that from your head coach in his 9th year after he just essentially got an extension for the next decade. I just don't know. I can understand why some fans are pretty riled up, and I could understand if they start slow on Saturday. I think a lot of people are going to hear about it, but boy, it is what it is. I also think James, I don't know about you, but I just think he was pretty upset after the game as well, because he didn't have to bring that up the way that he brought it up. Aaron Donald, there's only been one in the last 100 years, but I just think that yes, it's true, but after watching the team get hammered, then to have to hear that, it was almost like a double shot there. So I don't know. I think it's going to be a very interesting Saturday for Penn State. We'll be up there 7:30. It's the whiteout game, and Kirk Sherrock is coming back. We don't know who's going to be the starting quarterback, but it sure sounds like if Sean is going to be healthy, Johnny, I don't think James and Sean Clifford I don't think James and Mike Yurcich think it's much of a debate. He's earned the right to play, is what James Franklin said. So we'll see. But I wanted to ask you about your AP ballot. I know that Penn State has dropped from 10 to 16, and deservedly so. They probably could have dropped even lower, and I don't know that anyone would have a fault with that. But how did you construct your ballot, and where did you have Penn State?
Yeah, so I had Penn State at 15, dropping from 10, and like the teams ahead of them that had one loss, USC, Wake Forest, Oklahoma State, and Alabama. I just looked at their losses and I'm like, okay, well, Alabama lost by 3, at Tennessee, and Oklahoma State lost to TCU in overtime. Wake Forest lost to Clemson in overtime. USC lost by a point at Utah. And so Oregon as well, like they got blown out by Georgia, but they've since rebounded and avenged that loss. Penn State has an opportunity to do the same. But yeah, I Penn State 15. I felt like that was fine. Look, it's tough when you have, once it hits a certain point, you can construct the teams how you want to construct them, and you can argue that, they should be 16 or 17. But behind them, I had, Kansas State, Utah, Kentucky, Texas, Mississippi State. I mean, if these games are being played, if they're facing it on a neutral field, they're toss-up games. And so, yeah, I had them at 15. I had Tennessee at 1, just because I was, it's the win of the year. They have 4 wins over teams that were ranked at the time of playing. The Vols are doing it, and it's been so much fun to watch. At the end, after we're done all the interviews and wrapping up our stories in the press box at the Big House, a few of us were watching the end of that Tennessee-Alabama game, and Hendon Hooker's legit, Bob. So, yeah, I had Tennessee 1, Georgia 2, and then Michigan I moved up to 3 because I thought that, again, that's the way that they dismantled Penn State was one of the best wins of the season as well.
Yeah. I also want to commend the Tennessee fan base for not getting cheated in their post-game celebration. As far as celebrations go, I don't know that I've seen many, if any, better than what transpired in downtown Knoxville. I'm glad. As far as I know, no one got hurt, but the just to see that crowd on the field after the game, it was an amazing sight. And I don't know, I the players I think were smoking cigars in the locker room after the game. So if any one team is maybe in line for maybe a letdown this week, I mean, if it was Tennessee, I wouldn't be surprised because they put everything in to the game and the post-game celebration. But I know that they have beaten a lot of good teams. Good for them. Penn State, you had at 15. They're actually 16, and they need to answer the bell more so than I think maybe any other team in the country because of all the things you just said. It was not just a loss. It was a soul-crushing loss that probably could have been and should have been worse. So Sean Clifford, James Franklin, Mike Yursich, the defensive front seven. I mean, there's a lot of guys. I think there's a lot of guys in State College that really need to rebound nicely. We're going to see if they can do it. Is there any other takeaways you had or anything else strike you from James' press conference, Johnny?
Not really. I mean, the one thing was his take about the tunnel at the big house, one tunnel, because we saw some video of, I don't know who James Franklin was yelling at. Perhaps it was Jim Harbaugh, but he was saying, I'll control my guys. You control yours. There was some jawing at halftime. There was some video surfacing on Twitter about that. Apparently, I just saw on Twitter, it was a Michigan reporter who, they're talking to players today. And apparently a Penn State player threw a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at one of the Michigan players. So I don't know. It was ugly on the field. It was ugly in the tunnel, apparently. I don't know if Michigan Stadium is going to be making any renovations to make sure that they have two separate tunnels for the teams. It's kind of been that way for a while. But that was, I don't know. I thought that was really the main thing was Allar and Clifford, and we didn't get any clarity on Clifford's health. Specifically, again, as expected, James doesn't talk about injury stuff unless it's season ending. But if Allar is the guy, his high school coach thinks he's ready, Bob. I visited Medina, Ohio on the way out to Ann Arbor.
Yeah, let's tease it up, Johnny. Talk to the fans, the listeners, and the viewers. You on the way out, you stopped at Drew Allar's school. So let's just give a little tease of what they could expect later in the week on PennLive.
Yeah, I spoke to Allar's high school coach, their athletic director, and his top receiver from last year at Medina High School in Ohio. Went to JoJo's Sports Bar down the road for some lunch. They were saying how Allar has to start. So he has the support of everyone in Medina, and he went through a similar situation where he sat behind an older quarterback for a year. Really, he ended up taking over mid-season as a sophomore. So I got into that a little bit more specifically with the coach and his teammate and the administrator there. And so we'll have a story coming out later this week on that. So keep an eye on that at PennLive.com. Love
it. Got to ask, what did you have for lunch at JoJo's, and how would you on a scale of 1 to 10? Was it a cool place to hang?
Yeah, so it ended up packing up pretty significantly because everyone was coming in to watch the Cleveland Guardians game against the Yankees midday, and their thing there is they have this side. They call them JoJo's, and they're basically just massive potato wedges. Really good stuff, especially for a guy who was driving 2.5 hours or whatever the heck it was from Pittsburgh and didn't eat. Went and did all the interviews and then was starving afterwards. It was good stuff.
All right, so there you got it, Penn State fans, straight from Johnny McGonigal. If you're ever in Medina, Ohio, or close by, and you're hungry, JoJo's is not only not a bad option, it might be the option. Am I right, Johnny? The option. Good people, good grub, good vibes. We'll look forward to that story then later in the week on Drew. Penn State fans are going to get up, hopefully, for the whiteout game, Penn State, Minnesota, 7:30 on ABC. And I think the Penn State offense had better get its act together. Johnny, you and Dustin will be around later in the week to do a podcast. Dave Jones and I will have one sometime in the middle of the week, but it is the second half of this Penn State season. They're 5-1, and this losing streak probably needs to stop at 1, or else it could get a little nasty, I think, at Beaver Stadium on late Saturday night.